Welcome to the Building Community Wealth Discovery Group of Maximize Northwest Missouri and the Community Foundation. My name is Crystal Golnick with Jupiter Communications, here today to facilitate and share in this discovery group panel on the topic of building community wealth. Maximize Northwest Missouri's discovery groups are really designed to help us all learn more about what's going on throughout the region, as well as just learn about proven research that's related to topics that impact all of us. So today we have with us Steve Winger and Mary Hind, and I will kick us off to kind of give our topic here some context within Maximize Northwest Missouri's intentions and role, and then share a little bit more before we close. So we plan to have a few minutes before we close to take some of your questions. So please do share any of those that come up during the presentations in the chat box. One of us might say something that you'd like to know a little bit more about, and we'd love to discuss that at the end. So we'll do our best to answer whatever we can. With that, let's go ahead and get started here. So Maximize Northwest Missouri is focused on inspiring and connecting and guiding communities to dream big, grow leaders, and collaborate across several different sectors, primarily healthcare, economics, education, housing, and other quality of life aspects. And we do this through a proven set of tools for meaningful collaboration. We call it the Maximize My Community Journey, and it starts by getting to know more about the community in the region from many points of view, and as well as many different types of experiences, right, of the people who live here. And then helping people envision what could be if they decided to work together and maximize the potential of their community. And then next, encourage and coach individuals and groups and organizations through the steps of taking action. And finally, provide a set of related questions that simply help all involved identify and celebrate their progress and opportunities for improving in the next cycle of our work together, right? How can we get better? What went well? What didn't go so well? So simply said, the journey is just about seeing, believing, and doing better together in a way that sustains what I call the greatness of the region, right? Many of us who've been involved in different collaborative groups throughout Northwest Missouri understand what the Great Northwest means. So the work of Maximize Northwest Missouri is not about duplicating what's already going on, any of those collaborative efforts that I just mentioned, or competing with any of those existing efforts. It's not about politics. The intention is just to help people see more clearly, make sense of what can seem overwhelmingly complex sometimes, right, in our communities and the region, and grow more hope when it wanes, because it does sometimes, right? It's a little bit of a roller coaster sometimes. The approach just respectfully helps everyone be their best without stepping on each other's toes. And I just want you to notice here on the screen that then the arrows never overlap, right? So that means we're not duplicating or getting into each other's lane. The slide just is showing the steps to high community performance, and they go from reactive actions and paths forward that often, cross each other, like the paths themselves cross each other. And there's kind of some fuzzy divided goals, right, in the reactive. And it goes to the opposite end on the other side of this slide that shows everyone on a shared path, still excelling in their respective individual lanes, but working toward well-defined united goals. So instead of only being focused on short-term projects, we're just trying to help leaders define how those projects are short-term wins in the bigger picture. We know that by asking the right set of questions, we can empower leaders to answer and act in ways that help everyone work smarter, not harder. So what you might be asking next is just, I mentioned that we ask a lot of questions. The proven framework that we're using has a lot of questions in it, but the foundational question, to keep it super simple, that we're asking before any others is, what can we do together better than any one of us can't really do as well alone, right? So, as you see on the screen there, and the high level answer to that, at least for the Maximize Northwest Missouri team, is to simply ensure that local communities and the region can strengthen and enhance existing efforts in the places that we live, learn, work, play, and give through empowering leaders, protect what's loved most about the region, right? Because we all love a lot about our region, and bring together public, private, and nonprofit leaders to solve problems and take advantage of new opportunities across community and county borders. And finally, just make better decisions together for smarter and faster results. So, the place we're most focused on is the Community Foundation of Northwest Missouri's coverage area. It's 18 counties, and serving this area simply means that we also work with those in the surrounding regions at times, right? But our focus is primarily on these 18 counties. And the colors in this map just show that we're not all the same. We're primarily rural, which is all of the dark green counties, but we also have some areas with different characteristics simply because they either are a metropolitan area like Buchanan County, or they're surrounding and have more access to those metropolitan areas like Andrew, DeKalb, Clinton, and Caldwell, or you have a micropolitan population up in Nottoway County, primarily due to the fact that Northwest Missouri State University is there. So there's a little influx of population during the academic year. So, and as you can see, we've had participants involved in some way, shape, or form from every county over the past decade, with a few key areas that have been involved at some point in different ways. And a few of those communities are really making progress because they've committed to the process, right? And they've adopted the concepts of the Maximize My Community journey and the embedded communities of excellence framework of questions and answers. And I would say that it's not necessarily just because they're following the journey, right? It's because they've made a commitment and they have some characteristics that Steve is going to share with you in just a couple of minutes here. But that progress that I mentioned in several communities, they're making it. It requires leaders from all of the major sectors or core aspects of the community at the table, and we've summarized those here. You can see on the screen the core aspects of community as health, economy, education, housing, and other quality of life aspects. What do I mean by that? I mean things like recreation and utilities and transportation, some of those key things that we need in our communities. And in looking at the outer circle, you can see that there are many more areas each of those include, regardless of whose specific priority you put in the center. It's all interdependent on all of these people at some level. And the conversation today is about finding some win-win strategies to build community wealth around the values and the vision that are shared across communities and counties and the region. And it will require that we think a little bit bigger, maybe than we're used to doing, beyond and across our traditional lines of competition. It might require that we help residents and leaders grow in their abilities to make a difference and simply get even better than we already are, because we're a pretty collaborative region, but get better than we are at working together. So Northwest Missouri is definitely known in our state for how well we've worked together in the past. But Steve, I would just like to know from your point of view and your research, whether you'd like to share with the group here a bit about what you've learned, as well as what you know through that research, other accomplished community development experts have to say about characteristics of sustainable success.
Very good. Thank you. Um, I know some of you are aware of Don Mackey. Don Mackey is a rural community economic development person who has served the United States for nearly 45 years. He's trying to return, or retire, but we don't let him. And he and his colleagues years past, and you may know Don from the Center for Rural Entrepreneurship, you may know him from Hometown Competitiveness. His fingerprints are vast and in lots of places. He's also spent some time in Northwest Missouri. So a few years back, we're talking 20, 25 years ago, he, along with other community economic developers, kind of came up with this list of 20 key factors. And of course, when you have 20 key factors, you have just about none. So over the course of time, Don kind of evolved and they settled on three main things. If you're going to be successful as a rural community, probably any community, but especially a rural community, you do these three things. And we're going to focus today on invest in themselves, but I want to talk a little bit about each part of it. Um, and there, you can't really pull them apart because without leaders, there's nobody to lead the invest in yourselves. Without the can do attitude, you can't find the leader. So they're intertwined. So they went from 20 to the three, and it just makes a lot more sense. You might call this sort of the elevator version of all of the research is down into these three big buckets. So let me first start about the can do attitude. Communities are run by the people who show up. That's one of our founders of Communities of Excellence, Lowell Cruz. That's one of his quotes. But what we're really looking at is many perspectives from the community to lead with integrity and hope, and ultimately a citizen resident sense of positive possibility, a desire to improve, and agency. Agency is a word that Don used a lot, and it means a feeling of empowerment, but also a sense of obligation to the community that I ought to do this. I can do this. I ought to do this. That is agency. And when you have that, then it's easier to find others, such as developed leaders across generations. So, to create sustainable pipeline of new and diverse leaders who understand how to lead communities of excellence, how to lead Maximize Albany, the Clinton Initiative, Maine in Maysville, or any of the names that mean community and finding the leaders across the generations. Almost every community that's worked in the area of community development and leadership development, they all agree it is intergenerational. You have to find young people, develop them, and an appreciation of all the generations. So the old guys like me get along real well with the young ones and back and forth, and there's a respect that is built and obviously quite needed. So in doing this, it ensures continuity of traditions, processes that are working well, and an openness to fresh ideas that come from all ages and ranges of experience. We've all been in that situation where it can feel a little awkward if you're the youngest person in the room or the oldest person in the room. It shouldn't matter, but sometimes it actually does. So let me focus for a little bit more on the invest in themselves. um, Don and almost all the other community developers that have had success and worked in rural places, if you have the leaders with a can do attitude and they invest in themselves, they've got a shot. It's not a guarantee, but those big three things happen and you are going to have more success. And I know Mary's going to speak after me about a very specific learning and lesson from community foundations and the transfer of wealth. But the key points here around invest in themselves is it's a savvy blending and braiding of resources, such as philanthropy, which we're going to talk about, grants, tax-based tools. And I know tax is a four-letter word in Northwest Missouri. Guess what? It is a four-letter word in every community. But one of the things we've learned is not so much that people hate the idea of taxes, they just don't feel in control. So in communities like Ord, Nebraska, and others that have done very, very well for themselves, they set the standard, they pass the tax for maybe it's school, maybe it's downtown, maybe it's rebuilding the hospital. It could be any number of things that are tax based, but they're in control, and that the whatever was promised was fulfilled. If it was a 3-year deal, it's a 3-year deal. So it's about control more than it is any other fear. In addition to that, state, federal programs, finding people to work with your leadership team who understand those assets, sponsorships. That would be a little bit different than philanthropy, but you find sponsorships from various organizations, health organizations, municipal organizations, education, where they can sponsor human capital. That's a fancy way of saying people that give a hoot that are willing to participate in the process and required to act on the plans and activities that they've had. So you can have a leadership group, you can have the can-do attitude, but if nobody seeks the assets and resources needed, it's just wishful thinking. So the invest in themselves is diverse, people, money, and all kinds. Think of, I've come to learn that I just gave you a whole list of things, and I know later there's going to be a couple slides around very specific niches. I want you to think about these. And it's really about the blending and braiding of them to get what you want. Think of it like a revenue stream. Instead of um, only being on grants or only being on tax base or anyway, it's revenue streams. Just like any other, if the community was a business, these are about revenue streams to help out the community to actually achieve its goals. So if you want a little short, an acronym, the elevator, successful communities develop leaders across generations with a can-do attitude and invest in themselves. If you can remember that little jingle, then you're going to be in good shape. Next, please. I'm going to take just a couple minutes here to talk about where we've been. By the way, Don Mackey has been in here in the 2016-18 range. He did a little bit more work in the 20s. So there's several fingerprints, if you will, that he has helped us think about such things. So early, nearly 10 years ago, the transfer of wealth study through the Community Foundation, which Mary's going to talk about in a moment, that was sort of the beginning of it. And then as we really started thinking through, okay, well, what do we need to do? So we had listening sessions and community conversations, several hundred people involved over the course of multiple counties, then launched a pilot in 3 different communities. And we're using the National Learning Collaborative of Communities of Excellence. And also a lot of we were educated as leaders, but we also shared that with a number of different communities. So then we move on into the 2017 to 20, and we kind of regrouped. How do we do this in such a way that is more focused on the community than any one aspect, like economic development, like just entrepreneurship? Because it turns out that entrepreneurship and ecosystem building really means cool places to live and work. I mean, that's the fancy. I mean, you can get into the details of, and we learned a lot about how entrepreneurship works and all the stages, but it means people will show up and stay in places that they think they can thrive. And that is the whole basket. All of it is there. So over the course of time, we keep learning, and ultimately leaders that collaborate, which is not just get along. And it's great that Northwest Missouri gets along. I think that's great. We're civil to each other. I literally had a session when I was back in the day when we were analyzing our market. We're talking the late 1990s, and the analysis was in Northwest Missouri, from a health perspective, we smoke too much, we're too heavy, but we don't shoot each other. And so that was literally a presentation to the board. And so we get along, but we didn't ever quite get that last part to act on the good nature and the goodwill that we generally have in Northwest Missouri among organizations and communities. So we want to take advantage of teaching, coaching, and getting people to act on that collaborative spirit. So with that, I would like to pass it on to my friend Mary Hine, the Community Foundation in Northwest Missouri, and talk to us about the transfer of wealth study and what they've learned over the last 10, 12 years. Mary?
Thank you, Steve. I appreciate it. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the transfer of wealth and what that means and how that affects us, how we can act on that. Next slide, please. So first, I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself and the Community Foundation. As Steve said, I'm with the Community Foundation in Northwest Missouri, and I'm the president and CEO there. I've been there since it started in 2009. It was started to help the 18 counties of Northwest Missouri create a philanthropic culture and make it the best place it can possibly be to live. And we're still working on that today. The Maximize Northwest Missouri effort is part of that. That's part of our place-based initiative of the Community Foundation to help the 18 counties of Northwest Missouri. I was also the founder of the Alliance of Missouri Community Foundations. So that is the membership is all the community foundations in Missouri. And I get them together on a regular basis. We first started getting together in 2011 to do the transfer of wealth study. And then we most recently did another transfer of wealth study after the most recent census. Next slide, please. So what we found here in Northwest Missouri, that most people want to maximize their impact of giving dollars back to their community, that they understand that those dollars make their communities and their counties the places where people want to live. And so we came up with various different funds. We call those component funds, where people can start those funds. It's very similar to your own private foundation. And we help people give back very purposefully. And that creates also a legacy that goes on forever of them helping in Northwest Missouri. Next slide, please. So this is how we look at it at the Community Foundation. Our donors decide they want to start a fund and they want to give back to Northwest Missouri. They get a tax deduction in the year that they make the contribution to start their fund. And then that is invested. The donor chooses, however, they want it invested in the stock market. We have many different pools that they can put that in. And then we administer that for them. So when they're ready to give back at any time, they don't have to do it right away. And they don't have to do it in any increments. They can give back to the causes that they care about. And in that way, they're able to give the money, we grow it, and we grant it for them. Next slide, please. So we also consider that an engine for prosperity. By starting a fund and contributing, donors and people are investing and growing their money to increase the quality of life in Northwest Missouri. And when that's increased, you have more people excited about living in Northwest Missouri and coming here. And then we have more donor engagement, and the circle just continues around. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about the transfer of wealth. Well, what is the transfer of wealth? Basically, it's exactly that. It's the transfer of assets from one generation to the next generation. In this slide, it's the example of transferring from the baby boomers to the Gen X and millennials. So this slide is over 50 years, and it encompasses how much money will transfer in the United States, which is $84 trillion. So it's something that we need to look at here in Northwest Missouri. Next slide. So how do we know that this transfer of wealth is really an accurate measurement of what the assets are that will transfer from one household or one generation and one household to another? Well, this last year, the Alliance of Missouri Community Foundations engaged with the Center for Civic Research and Innovation in St. Louis. And they looked at a lot of these different areas, including the census, life expectancy, income, and they looked at a lot of different organizations who put out that information, including the CDC. And so we know it's a very accurate measurement, or as accurate as it can possibly be, of what the transfer of wealth is. Next slide. So here in Northwest Missouri, right now, the transfer of wealth is valued at $4 billion. In 10 years, it will be valued at $6 billion. And in 50 years, that will be $19 billion that will transfer from one generation to the next. I would encourage you to think about the 50-year figure. And I say that because it takes a while to help people understand the impact that they can have by leaving some of their assets to a fund to help in Northwest Missouri. And it takes a while to get that kind of corpus going. Next slide. So here I broke it down by county. I hope that you can see this on your screen. But as I said, in the next 50 years, $19 billion will transfer. in Northwest Missouri. You can see how that breaks down by county. In the transfer of wealth study that we did, we have it broken down by all the counties in Missouri. So if you're ever interested in diving into that information a little more, you can look at our website, cfnwmo.org, and find the transfer of wealth. Or you can go to the Alliance website, which is allmo.org, and find that entire transfer of wealth study there and look at more information about your individual county. Next slide, please. So the Alliance of Missouri Community Foundations since 2012 has been asking across Missouri and advertising across Missouri the power of giving just 5% of your estate to a fund or to charity, as we would say, in Missouri. And we've been talking about that and advertising that for quite a while. So over 10 years, that would be 5% would be 300 million. It's 6 billion, and then 5% is 300 million, and 50 years of the 19 billion, that would be 950 million here in Northwest Missouri. Next slide. So 950 million in the next 50 years in our 18 counties. You can see what that would amount to per county. So just for example, if Putnam County started their own affiliate fund, their own community foundation, so to speak, and they started advertising, leaving, and fundraising to leave some money to their county, they would have $17 million to go back into that county to do good things. Next slide. Sometimes it's really hard to get your head around what that would mean. And so I put up the example of paying tuition. You could pay a full ride for 20,000 to 25,000 students. The other thing you could do, which I get asked a lot about as I travel around Northwest Missouri, how can we build a healthcare clinic in our community or in our county? So you would be able to build 25 of those around the region for that $950 million. Next slide. I often get asked too, who does this? Who gives the money? And how much money is there? Well, right now at the Community Foundation, this slide I just realized is old. We have $37 million under administrative management that we help our donors with, and we have 225 different funds. Now, 11 of those are affiliate funds. And what I mean by affiliate funds is it's a group of people who've come together to start a fund to help their community or help their county. So today, I don't know where all you are from, but if you don't have an affiliate fund in your community or county, I would encourage you to think about doing that, to have a place where people can give money so it will go back into your community to help do all those things that you'd like to do. Next slide. So how does that work with the Community Foundation? You can connect with us. We help you set up a fund. It takes about 20 minutes, and then you've left your legacy either into the near future or into perpetuity to do good things in Northwest Missouri. Next slide. So I wanted to talk a little bit today about the ways to give, ways that you can capture some of this transfer of wealth study for your area. You can give in all these different ways. We have people who've given combines or left life insurance. You know, we get checks every day, ACHs, that type of thing. But I want to talk a little bit about inheritance and estates. I think it's really important that we think about our community either as an additional heir. That's what my husband and I have done. So we have 2 boys, and then Northwest Missouri is our third heir. So when we die, our estate will be broken up into 3 parts, one for each of our sons, and then one for Northwest Missouri, so that that can go back into Northwest Missouri, where we raised our children, where we made our living, and where we've enjoyed an incredible quality of life. As I said before, the Alliance encourages 5%, leaving 5% of your estate. And I always encourage leaving a portion of that, considering your community, your air. So if you haven't done that, that's one thing we all have in common. We're all going to die at some point, and it's good to think about that now and set that up for the future. Next slide. So here's just a little information about how you can start a fund. And you can scan that if you want to. Stacy's in the office. She can answer any questions about funds. If you have any more questions about the transfer of wealth and how you can apply that to your community, if you want a presentation to a group in your community so they can understand a little more about the transfer of wealth and the importance of capturing some of that, you can give the office a call and schedule me to come out and speak. And please look at that detailed report if you're kind of a data person like I am, and enjoy that. Next slide. Thanks for letting me spend time with you today. Normally I do this in person, so then we'll have a little conversation about various things. If you have any questions, please feel free to put those in the chat box. And that's it.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Mary, for sharing just a little bit more about the Community Foundation. In other regions of the country that I've lived, I grew up with this idea that there was a community foundation and had this presence in a community. And so I'm really glad that this is something that's gotten started here in Northwest Missouri. And I know you mentioned that you started in 2009, is that right? So not all that old, right? This is a fairly new concept yet here within our region. So it's exciting to have an opportunity to help spread the word about it. So we might have a few more questions, but let's go through just a little bit more of the additional content that we have for you today, and then we'll open it up. So while I'm talking, if anyone has any questions, let me know. I thought it would be helpful to sum up why you might want to further explore, right? What the Community Foundation of Northwest Missouri offers. It's helpful to know your why and what you want to do with your funding or funding that you might attract from another resource, right? So that you can explain it in a compelling way. It's really difficult to generate a lot of activity around resourcing things until people know what that money might be used for and how it might make a difference. And same goes for you, right? So just out of curiosity, real quickly, if anybody wants to share, which of these two that you see on the screen do you think draws attention first from potential funders? Anybody want to take a guess? If not, I'll give you the answer. But it's if you said priority projects or you were looking at that, the activities, different initiatives and policies, otherwise known in the funding world as interventions, right? You are right. Those are the ones that typically attract more funding than the collaborative work that's essential for making those projects happen sometimes, right? So right or wrong, resources are usually a little easier to attract for specific things. And if you're wondering why, I believe it's just simply because they're easier to understand, right? They're easier to measure, they're easier to see tangibly and feel really good about. We have an emotional response to projects that we see that are very specific. And it's also easier to budget for those sorts of things and request specific types of resources, such as money. You might know specifically what you need money for. You might know exactly what you need volunteers for with various skill sets or talents at the table, right? Or specifically ambassadors or advocates that you want to get involved in your project because of their connections and maybe because of their personal stories, their experiences, right? And so if these intervention, right, priority project activities are addressing root challenges and causes of some of those challenges in our communities, that's awesome, right? Let's go ahead and attract as much as we can. But if they're simply short-term band-aids to bigger and more complex problems or opportunities, uh, maybe it's only good, right? And maybe even counterproductive in some cases. So for interconnected big impact interventions or priority projects to be really successful, there needs to be funding and other resource support for the integrations themselves, right? The collaborations with high-level strategic objectives for action, because that's where the listening and the learning and the relationship building and the planning and the aligning and the collaborative efforts that make those projects possible happen. So there are so many activities in any community group. I'm just thinking off the top of my head here, chambers, right? All kinds of different projects, Main Street committees, community betterment groups, regional events like our Great Northwest Day event, and many, many more, right? You can think of community groups or region-wide groups that have some really great things going on. Um, but the reality is all of that stuff is simply not free. It takes somebody's time either away from their paid job or volunteering with some of their free time. It takes skill sets and connections and sometimes things that actually require an actual financial contribution. The communities that I've worked with anyway across the country over the last decade that are funded through a backbone organization dedicating one or more positions or through grants or maybe a combination of partners coming together to serve as that backbone organization by pitching in to pay for some coordination and learning opportunities and coaching and other needs. Those are the communities that have a lot more success. They make more progress more quickly because they've invested in themselves, as Steve mentioned, and Mary shared as an opportunity, right? They've invested in themselves, and together they've built their community's overall wealth. It includes all the economic development. It includes all of the healthcare expansion and quality. It includes the entire education system from birth all the way through retirement, not just K through 12. It includes all of those social organizations that are necessary in an organization or, I'm sorry, in a community and the region. And it includes all those systems that weave us together, like transportation and broadband, internet, and all of those different things coming together at the table. So in order to do that, though, let's just be honest, there is a different mindset sometimes, right? That's required in the culture of these communities that thrive, especially when we're all wearing lots of different hats and we only have 24 hours in every single day. So just thinking about things a little differently can help sometimes. And instead of operating with a scarcity mindset, with a deference to the status quo and focusing on the technical aspects of individual priorities, the details and the projects and the activities and initiatives and policies and transaction change and assembling those existing ideas and tools and maintaining a task-oriented behavior. Those are all those things that you see in that dominant traditional mindset about addressing challenges that we share, right? Instead of that, successful communities that I've worked with anyway, they accept the need to help themselves. They understand that nobody's coming in to save them, quote unquote. And prospective funders learn to operate with an abundance mindset where they build on what they have that's good. They practice intelligent risk and innovation through proactive thinking and action, brainstorming and allowing ideas to flow together and sorting them out and aligning and staying true to their shared values and creating value through the entire system and staying focused on the journey itself and not really taking no for an answer, right? Have very can-do attitudes. The situation that I think of any multi-sector collaboration, it's not unlike the struggle that nonprofit organizations have, if you're familiar with those, in finding donors who are willing to invest in the administrative and the fundraising work, right? Because most of them want their dollars to only fund the direct impact programs and services. More and more funders, thankfully, and more volunteers are understanding that that important integrative work, that I shared in the last slide of doing the work of collaborating, of planning, of talking, of building relationships with each other, of vetting out different opportunities is incredibly important in order to get to those root level, really meaningful opportunities to impact our communities in a positive way. So there are many different options out there for funding. Some are pretty traditional and well known. Others are really only possible with key players and communities coming together around the same table as a collective effort. And I think the four, honestly, out of everything on this slide, and I'm not going to share it with you, hopefully you can see some of that. If you want to talk about them more afterwards, let me know. But the four that I think, and I've seen anyway, have the greatest opportunities, greatest potential, great places to start with, beyond all of the great efforts that economic developers who are working to help grow our businesses and attract companies that feed and flow through the community, and the regional economy, right? Like there's a lot of awesome work going on by our business community and our economic developers that are absolutely critical to this work. But in addition to that, wouldn't it be great to be able to take better advantage of some of those grant opportunities that are out there? Generate more donations from people who have really decided to understand and commit to and care about. I'm always amazed by Mary's story about how she's designated an additional beneficiary, if you will, right, from her state, so she can pass that along and continue to help the region. And it doesn't have to be an equal share, right? It can be a small share, it can be a large share, it can be whatever you want, as long as it's going to the community in some way, shape, or form. It can be helpful. But the four that you see kind of with stars next to them here are probably the best place to start. So the sustainable ones that have the big yellow star there for you, those are the ones that I think the Community Foundation can really be helpful with. Our elected leaders and those within our public sector also can be helpful. And we as voters, we have a responsibility and an opportunity and a great honor and privilege, right, to get out and vote and have some opinions on how finances get spent within our communities, and thinking about that not just from our own personal point of view, which of course is really easy to do, but also think about what's best for my kids, my grandkids, my neighbors' kids, grandkids, and older folks within our communities as well, right? Both the younger and older generations require lots of different services in a community that thrives, and all of those things need to be considered. So this is just a really quick overview for you of some different options on how to build community wealth. We've tried to give you a fairly broad view of different opportunities and some different perspectives here today. Do we have any questions that anyone would like to ask of Mary or Steve or myself while we have everyone here? If not, I do have a question for Mary. As it's popped up to me here, do you have some examples for us, right? Just some everyday examples of what types of people establish a fund, and also what are some of those fund dollars used for? What does it mean to invest in your community? And you're on mute, so.
Okay, there we go. Thanks, Crystal. That's a good question. The type of fund we have the most of, it's called a field of interest fund. And that's when individuals get together and they have a shared goal, shared mission, or passion to do something. And they don't want their own 501c3. They don't want to hassle with that. They don't want to handle their own checking account. They don't want to do any of those types of things. They just want to get together. They want to do something good, and they want to tell other people about what they're doing. And that's what all our affiliate funds are. They're a group of people within a community. They can be leaders. Sometimes they're the people we see as leaders, but a lot of times they're the people we don't see as leaders. They're the school teacher who's really passionate about improving education for her children in her classroom, or she's passionate about getting a new playground for the school children to play on. And so she will get some other people to join with her to do this and do something for their community. Our affiliate funds do things like put tracks in. That's, the walking track in King City around the football field. They do things like that. They build museums. They build community centers. They do a lot of them start with beautification. Cameron's starting that way, and Maysville started that way just by doing some very basic beautification efforts. So when the money comes in, they've bought park benches that are brightly colored for the main streets. They've put in potted flowers for the main streets, maybe some hanging banners saying welcome to Maysville or welcome to King City, wherever that may be, just to start people thinking about what's going on. And so those are some of the things they do. And a lot of times with the Field of Interest Fund, they'll have a passion or they'll have a goal in mind, and they'll just keep bringing money in and talking about what they're doing until they reach that goal. And that's when they'll do whatever project it may be, like a community center or a library. Does that help?
Yes, that helps a lot. I think it just makes it a little more understandable about what's actually possible, right? If I'm not wrong, you also have a lot of folks who establish scholarships. Is that right?
Yes, we do. We have a program called Scholar Link, and we designed some software so that a student can get onto our Scholar Link portal through our Community Foundation website, and they can fill out one initial application, and then that populates their information to all 100 of the scholarships that we administer. So if they are a trumpet major and there's a scholarship for a trumpet major, that comes up. But they may also be a wrestler, or they may also want to be a nurse. And so the scholarships that would help them do that also come up. And then they just fill out the rest of the information that's required for those particular scholarships. But in that way, we have wanted to create something around the region that helps our high school kids understand that we care about them. We, of course, want them to come home, but we care about them. We care about their education. We care about their next steps, whether it be a 4-year, a 2-year, or a certificate. We have scholarships for all of those things. And we also have a lot of agricultural scholarships that people have set up. So it's a wonderful way to leave a legacy. That most of those scholarships are named by the person that started them or the couple that started them. And so it's a great way to leave a legacy forever. And it's a great way to help kids.
That's awesome. And as someone who has a upcoming senior, it's nice to know that there's one place that she can go to take a look at some opportunities. That's helpful. I know many parents out there in the region would appreciate knowing that as well. So regardless of whether somebody wants to set up a scholarship fund, which of course kind of hits that whole education, lifelong education and attainment core aspect of community, You said you've got some affiliate funds for specific reasons or covering a specific geographic area, right? My question here that's being posed is how much do you have to have? Like, what's the minimum amount someone would need to get the ball rolling, shall we say?
Yes, so to start a field of interest fund, we ask that you have $1,500. The
Okay.
fee, administrative fee on that is much less. It's $400 a year. But what we found is that that's about how much you need to really start the ball rolling. So we ask that you start it with $1,500. And then if you need some fundraising tools, you're always welcome to use any of the materials we've developed. We have donation envelopes. We set up a QR code for your fund. I often go and kick off the fund and do a program for the big kickoff and try to get that started for the affiliate fund. So that's but $1,500 is the start.
Okay. Well, all of that and the additional information you just shared is helpful to know that there's some support there from your team as well, because sometimes that's kind of the scary part, right? Well, if I start this, how do I get the word out? How do I kick it off and invite others to engage in supporting the community as well? So that's great. Um, are there any other questions here? I think I've gotten all of them that I've seen in chat so far. So if not, is there anything else that you'd like to share, or Steve, you would like to share before we wrap up and share just a little bit more information?
I do have one example of what you said about specificity of the ask. Um, and Mary, I know you know this story. Chuck Place in Albany was one of the um, initial early board members of the community foundation, but he was also a community leader in Albany, very active. He and his wife Linda, and they started a fund, and it was fairly easy to raise money, and it was simply because everybody knew Chuck. So yes. Well, a few years later, obviously Chuck dies, and most recently, one of their projects that they want to do in Maximize Albany is renovate a theater, the Rigney Theater. And they first started, and they kind of do it like they did when Chuck was here. Hey, let's pass the hat and put money in the legacy fund. That's their community fund. It turns out, no bueno. What do you want exactly? And I mean, they had to get okay. We're to do tuck pointing, and here's how much tuck pointing is. And then this, and so they were able to be extremely specific, and they still haven't been able to finish the fund, but people are much more specific, much more demanding, and perhaps a little bit less trusting than it was. Hey, we trust Chuck, so we'll do anything. So that was an example of just the difference over time. And I do think generally we're in. I mean, we've done this before, by the way. America's we go up and down on anti-government. We go up and down on being afraid of others, and we're just in that phase now. But it will return to, I think, a more trusting place eventually. And we're just in that cycle where super specificity is what you need to be very successful with philanthropy, because saying I want to, even something as specific as I want to build a community center, that ain't good enough. It's going to be something you're going to have to provide some details and budgets, and like everybody loves the detailed PowerPoint. Whereas in level times of high trust, and we'll get there, you can be a little bit more general and say, hey, this group's been working on it. Here's what we need, big picture. But we're just not in that time right now, and hopefully before too long there'll be another round of high trust. And I don't know if that's a decade away, but it'll happen again.
Um, Great. That's a great story, Steve, and one I've thought about as well. And I think it just points to how important having a strong group of people who are collaborating together and building trusting relationships together and following a great process for planning that people trust, right? That people know, okay, they've done their due diligence. This is something that I can feel good about supporting. So We are in a time, and I don't think we'll ever not be in a time when people really appreciate people who have done their due diligence and are committed to the community in that way. So thank you. That's a great reminder of that. So, and that's kind of exactly what Maximize Northwest Missouri, of course, is all about. So, what's next for you and for Maximize Northwest Missouri? We can really answer that for you and your community, but we can't do that. But we can plan to continue helping and at least offering our services to help prepare for big opportunities specific to unique shared priority projects so that they can be more fully successful and more fully leverage different resources that we know come available so often, sometimes on a fairly regular schedule, like through USDA or our wonderful regional planning councils and commissions, our other foundations, our organizations such as Main Street, maybe even WealthWorks and other public and private entities. And we do this by raising awareness of the region's assets and activities, by bringing people together, by establishing and growing can-do attitudes, along with other proven community values and mindsets, and building bedrock relationships, those ones that we just mentioned, and processes and resources that can help communities take advantage of the opportunities and solve problems much faster because they're already working together. There have been funds that have been attracted to Clinton County, for instance, for a broadband. It was an experimental project, but the reason that the National Science Foundation and US Ignite decided to award little tiny Turney in Clinton County as one of their few projects across the entire country was because there was already a collaborative group here following a guided process that they felt confident in. And so it really does help. It's all in preparation, right? That's what allows us to take advantage of opportunities when they come to us. So what can be done in Northwest Missouri is we can change how we work together. We're making progress, certainly, and lots of organizations, just by talking about this, are starting to think about how they can work together more and more often, which is wonderful. And we just love for you to join us, however you find it helpful to you. There's a made-up word that you might have picked up on today that I've been using for nearly 20 years. It's collaboration. Yet we're not making a mistake and pronouncing collaboration incorrectly. We meant to do that on purpose. And it's because collaborating is more than just talking about the topics. It's more than knowing and understanding the story. It's about moving forward with action together, following through on our intentions, and just getting to work with can-do spirit. Not Pollyanna, but definitely can do. So you're officially invited to join the action. You can be a door opener through your network and serve as an ambassador or an advisor to maximize Northwest Missouri's programs and conversations that bring many sectors together. You can participate in all of the things that you see here on the screen, from regional forums to discovery groups like we're holding now, to engaging in learning opportunities and applying the Maximize My Community journeys, promising practices of what you can do in your neighborhood, your community, your county, and your region. You can also be a donor. We'd be remiss in this topic of building community wealth to not mention that the Maximize Northwest Missouri Fund is one of those affiliate funds of the many different missions and purposes housed under the Community Foundation's investment umbrella. So you can learn more about that at www.maximizenwmo.org. You can also link to the Maximize Northwest Missouri work through the Community Foundation's website. They have a button that links to this. We're essentially a committee of the board at this point. And you can also send an email to us at together@maximizenwmo.org to reach a navigation team member to help out. So I'm going to leave you today with this quote. It's never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed, and we've added these words, empowered and organized citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. And these two additional words to the statement, empowered and organized, I really believe, as well as many others who have worked in community development, feel that they're the hidden keys to this statement's truth. We're here to serve you in your communities because we're better together in maximizing our collective potential. So thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate it, and we look forward to talking with you in the future. Take care, everyone.